So we've been working for about 10 months on trying to gather consensus across the industry on what is the direction for NFV. So, for my sins, we published a document last October which introduced the concept of NFV, and we founded the ETSI NFV ISG, an industry specification group, not to do standards, but to actually deliver to the industry a consensus around what is the direction for that technology so that we can encourage growth of an open ecosystem and encourage vendors to come up with solutions. So we published 5 documents last week. They represent the consensus of the industry at this point in time. Use cases, the fields of application around which NFV in the early days will be focused. Requirements, which is the high-level business requirements and technical requirements for the technology. Things like what are the requirements for energy consumption management, security, those kind of things. Architectural framework, which is where the vendors can see where they fit in the domain of an NFV infrastructure, where are the reference points around which they will interoperate with each other. And a terminology, because about a year ago, nobody heard of network functions virtualization. It's not a surprise, because we actually invented that term. And we released that term to the industry in that first white paper last October. And as a result of that, the industry's amazingly catalyzed itself into this attention, because everyone gets it. Networks become software. And if it's software, then anything's possible, of course. So terminology has been an important way in which to get the operators understanding what the terms and what these new things are, because it represents a lot of information technology know-how that is brought into the network space. And networks people don't really know too much about terminology of the IT world. Vice versa, people in the IT world have got misconceptions about what networks are and what the requirements of operators are. So that terminology document is a helpful lexicon for the industry to use in a common dialogue, irrespective of what the national language is or whether you're a vendor or an operator. And then finally, proof of concepts. We're really focused on implementation. This is not a standards organization. We want to encourage innovation, an open ecosystem, interoperable solutions that call out existing standards where they exist, or incrementally improving or developing standards where they don't exist, but primarily implementation. So we've encouraged the industry to come forward with multi-party proof of concepts sponsored by an operator that we can then publish and examine the results, take them into our work, but more importantly, publish them to the wider industry so that the wider industry can get some kind of handle on exactly where we are with NFV at any point in time. So Intel have been an important enabler for this. So in the early days of our collaboration with Intel, which we published as BT last year, we developed a proof of concept that proved that NFV type of technology could be used to implement network functions. So Intel played an important role in gluing together the relationships that led to the formation of the ETSI NFV ISG. But of course we're not limited to Intel architecture. It's very important to understand that all of our work is independent of the underlying chipset architecture. Of course, Intel architecture is important in the cloud environment, but there are other architectures, for example ARM, and there's a whole ARM ecosystem that could be applied to this. So although Intel have been a very important enabler and continue to be very supportive of the work, that it's not uniquely around Intel. First of all, the challenge is how do you bring together an open ecosystem to produce interoperable solutions that make sense in the network world? So that's a challenge. How do you create an open ecosystem? Probably the more interesting challenge from my perspective is how do I bring in the innovation from the cloud environment where they've been doing orchestration of virtual applications functions for a long time. You just have to look at the over-the-top ecosystem to see that. What I'd like to bring is all of that know-how into to be focused on networks, so that the kind of things that networks are required to do can be done by this cloud ecosystem and the cloud technologies. So not reinventing what they do. So that's, to me, a key challenge, getting those in. And then I guess the third one is management and orchestration. How can network operators with very large existing base of OSS bring in effectively a cloud type of functional architecture, orchestrate all of those network functions in a way that our OSSs and BSSs can manage. And that is probably also one of the major focuses for the operators going forward, is to work through how we work that out. So network functions virtualization first came to prominence when we published our white paper last October. at the SDN and OpenFlow World Congress. It was widely regarded as a seminal moment for the industry, and when I was at that conference, watching the audience, I could see two types of people there. Traditionally, that conference is very much focused on the IT industry, but it got out and rumoured that a white paper was coming from the network operators, and there was an uptick in attendance of that conference by networks people. And suddenly you saw in the room, the worlds came together. And to me, that was a really important moment. The two worlds of networks and cloud, in terms of measuring the people working together on a common cause, came together at that point. A year on, we've published our second white paper where we pointed out the ETSI NFV ISG's documents to the industry. The first white paper was signed by 13 network operators. The second white paper has been signed by 24 network operators, plus the cable industry represented by Cable Labs. So you've seen a doubling of network operators signed up to the notion of NFV in just 1 year. With the publication of the documents, I've come here to introduce some of those to a slightly different audience here at the Broadband World Forum. And what's been apparent to me is that this is going to hit this body or this forum in a big way over the next year. Already, I've seen presentations from some of the players that have referenced the ETSI work. So just 1 week after publication, the work's being referenced and vendors are starting to hang their product roadmaps on those. You fast forward a year, and take, for example, the other conference I just mentioned. It doubled in size over the year. So 300 last year, 700 this year. I think what will happen to this conference is you'll begin to see increasing the penetration of cloud players into this environment. So whereas today you're very broadband access focused, at least in my top level perception, I know it's not completely true, thanks to you having the foresight to put the SDN and cloud thread on the conference, then you're going to start to see a significant growth in that. And as you look at the NFV use cases that were published last week, you'll begin to see many of them are very relevant here. And so those are going to be the kinds of focus that I think will grow in 2014. Much, much bigger focus on the software aspects of networking and not so much a diminishing, but perhaps less prominence given to what we take for granted, which is the connectivity piece, right? We do connectivity, cloud-delivered applications. These two things are merging, and that's going to be reflected next year. And you're going to see commercial products coming on stream, more deployments being announced, more trials being announced next year. The highlight of this show for me, it's coming back after 8 years of absence myself. In my earlier days, I was an access guy, and I was talking about BT's fibre to the home and fibre to the cabinet trials that I, at the time, was the architect of those. Now I'm here to talk about a software world, which is a complete 180 degrees turnaround. So to me, the highlights are to see the rising prominence of virtualization in the agenda. The kind of audience here is more business focused, so we're communicating to a business audience. So that's a highlight that's very important. I guess the best moment for me was a presentation by PayPal on how they orchestrate their cloud environment. And that's when I realized that was the world that I'm heading towards. They're already there. So you've got to watch out if you're a networks guy, because these guys are doing it, and we need to do what we do in networks in that software environment at least as well, but with the kind of network things that operators require. So for me, the highlight is seeing what the cloud guys are doing in the network space.